So we have Srini Kadamati here with us and going to talk about some really awesome stuff using TimescaleDB and Superset and dashboarding. I'm very excited. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super pumped.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And you can really just go right on and take the stage and
Perfect.
Let's learn. I'm excited.
Awesome. All right. I hope everyone can see this. Is this working? Yes. All right. Perfect. All right. Hey, everyone. Hope everyone's been enjoying Timescale Community Day. I've been able to watch a few talks, and it's been quite fun. We definitely is giving me some inspiration too for maybe we need to do something like this in the open source community that I'm involved with. Anyway, so hey everyone, my name's Srini. A little bit about myself. So I've spent the last decade broadly in the data space. I'm really passionate about data science and data science education. My obsession is just to figure out how to get more people working with data in their day-to-day lives. And so I spent a few years helping build an online learning company for data skills called DataQuest, and then decided to get closer to the tool side of things. So I'm excited to join up at Preset, where we offer a managed service for Apache Superset. And it's been a lot of fun over the last 2 years now, being involved in our massive open source community. So Superset's affiliated with the Apache Software Foundation. So we have these interesting tiers called committers and PMC members. And so it's been just a fun journey to be in that community and to kind of understand how data tools can help people work with data in more contexts. So today I'm kind of focused on dashboard design. So in the vein of Neil deGrasse Tyson's book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, I kind of consider this my talk for dashboard design for people in a hurry. There's a lot of people, especially now that data is becoming so commonly used in everyone's lives. There's a lot of people now suddenly who are scrambling to figure out how to build dashboards that are useful. It's not really something you learn in school, right? So and it's a bit of an art and science as well. I know there's a lot of people in the Timescale community that are primarily more kind of data engineers or maybe DevOps or just full stack software engineers. And this is not kind of always conveyed and taught in that culture sometimes. So I think I'm kind of excited to share what I've learned building dashboards, and I'll also kind of pepper in timescale and superset stuff, like how to actually manifest these ideas using these tools. But the idea is really generalized to pretty much any tool. So you should be able to kind of apply them in other contexts as well. So first, I'll kind of start with an introduction to just dashboarding in general. I'll talk a little bit about kind of mapping out the space of dashboards. So how do you kind of make sense of the different options that are out there from a design standpoint? Oftentimes you're dumped into a tool. It's kind of like opening up Photoshop for the first time, and there's just so many bells and whistles. You can kind of create anything you want. You have a lot of freedom. How do you actually kind of figure out what to make and kind of bucketing things into use cases so that they're more likely to actually get used in your organization? I'll talk a little bit about the complexity that arises out of building dynamic dashboards, which is kind of a whole unique beast in and of itself. And then hopefully we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So I'm also watching my time to make sure that we get to that fun section at the end. So first, kind of a quick intro to Superset. We're a popular modern open source BI platform. So for data exploration and data visualization, we have this kind of no-code interface that generates SQL on the user's behalf. But you also can use our SQL editor to write raw SQL if you're so interested in that. We pretty much work with nearly any SQL-speaking engine. So one of the cool things when I was interacting with Attila and some of the early Timescale people about 6 or 8 months ago was the realization that because Timescale is really built on Postgres, in Postgres rather, Postgres has the best support in the Superset community, which is interesting because usually Postgres is not what people use for OLAP kind of analytical type of workflows, but Postgres is just super popular and it's used in our testing. It ships with the kind of Docker Compose image for Superset. So it is by far the best tested and best supported database. So we even support like CSV upload and things like that, which we don't necessarily for all the databases. So that's really exciting, and that automatically meant that it worked super well with Timescale as well. And we do have a large diversity of charts. So we ship with over 60 chart types, ranging from maps. You got your time series stuff. You have discrete things, categorical chart types as well. You can also add your own Viz plugins if you're familiar with D3 or React as well. So pretty cool, and it's all Python and kind of TypeScript, JavaScript. So very much designed for the cloud and the web browser. So to start things off, like what really is a dashboard, right? And the way I think about it is that in an organization or a team, you might generate a lot of different type of data products. You have notebooks. You might, someone might say, "Hey, can you just pull the data and send me a CSV of X?" You might have a trained statistical model. You may have APIs around data or models. Of course, dashboards. Then you may have reports. You may have a static PDF file or a data story. So a dashboard specifically is the way I think about it is it's a curated experience that lets people quickly compare charts to gain and reach basic insights. And all three of the bolded words here are really important. So curated, people are busy, and the whole point of a dashboard is to let people drop in and drop out. It's very rare that people will spend hours and hours in a dashboard because it's not really what they're designed for. It's really about curation, about helping people kind of solve their problem, get some insight, and drive action, usually outside of the tool. Quickly compare. So data visualization, one of the core tenets is comparing things. You're comparing two different values across a similar time interval, or the same kind of entity across multiple time intervals. It's all about comparison. And so when you're taking a single chart and you're scaling that up to a dashboard of 5, 10, 15 charts, comparison becomes the primary motive for a dashboard. So it's something to keep in mind is when you're designing a dashboard, if people cannot compare easily, it's kind of you're kind of breaking their workflow a little bit, and it's going to add more mental overhead for them. And lastly, basic insights, right? The goal here is not to, a dashboard is not going to replace scientific thinking or a very in-depth kind of hypothesis testing. It's not going to tell you why your business or operation is failing. It's more about kind of these basic insights that can be delivered quickly that you can then use to take some action or intervention. So this is kind of the framing that I really like. So what do people expect from a dashboard? So some of these are kind of obvious, but still I routinely see people not necessarily do them or think about them. So reflects updated data. I think that's kind of obvious. Information should be accurate. So if a lot of people do make dashboards and they use data sources that may be unreliable or have data quality issues, and that will lead to a sense of distrust in your team. Ideally, insights lead to new questions or interventions. They're not the thing in and of itself, but they're the thing that helps people get to the real thing. They should be dynamic. Otherwise, why are you making a dashboard? Maybe better as a Word doc, right, or a PDF. And the interactions should be quick. Insights should be delivered visually. And so next up, here's kind of the space of dashboards. So in the vein of someone from Rolling Stone, I forgot who said the quote, but learn the rules and then learn when to bring them. So that's kind of my pitch here as well. Is it's helpful to learn these three pillars and to know that you don't have to be married to them and know when to blend and break the rules a little bit. So first off, you have analytical dashboards. So they're really focused on understanding the past. This is really about understanding things that have already occurred. And these are going to be very exploratory in nature, highly interactive. So you really want these to be very responsive to user input. They may not even update on their own. They may kind of only update to user input a lot of the times. And so the goal here really is to understand what's already occurred and give people that context in a quick fashion. On the other hand, you have operational, which is kind of in the middle. It's showing the now in real time. So this is, if you think about a cockpit of an airplane or a submarine, right, or a kind of a Wall Street stock ticker, it's showing the now in real time. Usually it's live updating, otherwise it's not as interesting. You want to show immediate performance. So you'll definitely show things from the past, but it's mostly as a reference point, like, oh, this used to take 5 milliseconds and now it takes 500. So it's kind of more about referencing or benchmarking than it is about deep dive into past performance. And then you may also have multiple detailed views of similar data. I mean, I think that famous COVID dashboard that John Hopkins made, they were showing kind of the same information in many different views, and so you can kind of scan and glance across them, which is super important. Strategic, so showing progress towards the future. So this may only update at specific intervals, like once a week, once a day. This is more about progress towards a set of KPIs or goals. So I think we can kind of all think about how an organization, which of these three kind of would show up in your day to day. Also, good is to talk on dashboards. It's good to have examples, right? So analytical dashboard. This is kind of one we've made internally for understanding we have an open source project. So being able to dive through the past of GitHub issues and try to understand how things are trending. And just, the project's been around since 2016. So there's a lot of just interesting data in the GitHub repo. So being able to generate hypotheses and then drive some action is kind of an interesting use case here. Operational dashboards, so showing the now. So here we're showing kind of very recent performance. So page views for a marketing website happening just today, and how that kind of compares to the last week. So you want this to be live updating, as I mentioned, and having multiple views of similar data is also very useful. And lastly, strategic dashboards. Dials are a good way to do that, just showing progress towards a set of KPIs is super important as well. So the next natural question is how you actually start to blend these a little bit more. And I'm generally a fan of using tabs. So most tools like Superset and even Tableau and others, we have kind of ways to separate views into the data. So using tabs to separate out context is a very powerful way to accomplish just that. And so here we have kind of three different tabs. One, you probably don't want to call them operational, strategic, and analytical, but just kind of to drive the point across in this presentation. And so each of these, people load one URL and they're able to kind of switch context, which is awesome. So these are static. How do we actually make them more dynamic? And so filters are kind of the main ways that a lot of tools make dashboards more dynamic, because they let end users come in with interactivity in mind. So if they want to, on the right, we have the Slack dashboard that we've built. It's actually a default example that we ship in Superset. And so you can come in and ask more specific questions. So if you want to zoom in the data on a specific date range, if you want to look at specific Slack channels, for example, those are two of the filters that we've exposed. And the more you expose, the more power you're giving to people. But there's also downsides to that. So the biggest one is, of course, that people can also run into dead zones a lot of times, where you might have a specific slice of date and you may have a channel that hasn't been created at that time. And so then your charts will actually be completely empty. And so this is an interesting design when you're creating the dashboard, is how do you kind of provide a natural golden path for people where they can avoid running into that use case. Ultimately, you want to give people freedom to explore and be curious, but you also want to help them avoid some of these dead zones in the data, where just seeing a bunch of empty charts and zeros is not. It can also erode trust in the dashboard as well, which is kind of an interesting byproduct. So in Superset, we have a number of filter types. And so picking filters is designing filters that enable freedom, but also avoid some of these dead zones is also really important. And related to that as well is going to be performance. And so this is really where kind of I see Timescale and Superset working well together. And so when Attila and I did a demo on the TimescaleDB stream using stock market data, we were kind of tapping into the power of aggregates and continuous aggregates and Timescale. I'm sure there are other performance optimization you can do as well, and performance strategy you can apply in Timescale. I'm not a Timescale expert by any stretch of the imagination, but if you want to create kind of compelling, exploratory, analytical dashboards, you really want to tie your dashboard filtering strategy to your performance strategy. So every one of these filters on the left, which is kind of a screenshot from a Superset dashboard, you want to make sure that ideally, in most cases, they're really not hitting raw unindexed data. It's hitting kind of either some type of materialized view, or in the case of kind of a live updating dashboard, you probably, I guess, in timescale, continuous aggregates are probably going to be the main things. As with most BI tools, at the end of the day, they're just generating SQL on the user's behalf. And so if you can understand the kind of map of the kind of landscape of SQL that's being generated, and in this case with filters, it's usually where filters or group by filters, a group by SQL statements. If that's the case, if you can really understand that when you're designing the dashboard, you can make sure that when you're configuring timescale, your timescale setup, that they're aligned. And the key benefit here is that you're going to have a very fast experience. So if you kind of watch that stream that Attila and I did, kind of the charts would update in under a second, and a lot of times under 300 milliseconds. And so that kind of creates, that's what turns it away from just a simple internal type of dashboard or kind of simple visualization mechanism into something that feels a lot closer to an application, or even kind of a little bit like a game, right? People can come in and quickly iterate without paying too much of a delay or a penalty, which is super powerful. So the other important thing here is that if people have an inconsistent experience, that can also lead to some frustration. So if you have some filters and some charts updating in under 300 milliseconds, and then you have some that take 10, 20, 30 seconds, that also discourages kind of that experimentation and exploration. And even if you're, you might say, well, hey, there's a lot of data. This is just a kind of a reality. People may not always internalize that when they're using a dashboard, because a lot of the data is hidden from the user. A lot of the SQL is hidden from the user. So something to keep in mind is when you are designing this type of internal data product, you really want to make sure that you have consistent performance. Tying your performance strategy to your filtering and interactivity strategy is kind of the way to go. The other thing I will mention is for dashboards that are kind of slow changing, you may want to cache them entirely. Generally, our philosophy in Superset is we don't want to do much caching. Some tools have a different opinion there, but we kind of would rather lean on databases, data warehouses that are very fast nowadays, at kind of doing incredibly large data set computation. And so why not lean on the database for this, and only do caching for at a very simple level. So in Superset, we do have a caching layer, but it's only for things like a chart. If you're showing the same exact chart to a million people, why hit the database every single time, even if the database can handle it, right? So there's a few cases where if you're showing the exact same thing and the data is not changing that frequently, you may just want to cache it and kind of warm it through the API instead. So for a strategic dashboard that's only changing once a day, once a week, you can kind of avoid doing more than one query. Instead, just cache the entire result. Just looking at my time. So where do dashboards actually fall short? There's a few. So one is causality. Like dashboards, as I mentioned earlier, it's more about getting hunches and hypotheses. It's not about showing a scientific explanation. So in those cases, you really want to do more of a specific intervention, either an in-depth, slower statistical analysis, and then you can still use visualization to understand the data, but it's not going to be in kind of usually the form of a dashboard. And I think dashboards also struggle with truly open-ended exploration. So truly being able to come in and look at any data in the business from scratch, right? Most people are using dashboards created by the experts in the organization, people who are familiar with the data. But it's much harder to kind of do completely open-ended exploration where you just expose the full fire hose to people and hope that they kind of are able to do the analysis and dashboarding that they need to. It's much more challenging. You do kind of need more of a traditional workbench environment instead of a curated dashboard. So I think approaching the end of my time, so I just wanted to leave everyone here with a few more resources. So this is kind of just a taste as I see it. So there's a great post by an acquaintance of mine and their friend Amelia called "Run Your Data Team Like a Product Team." So this is a great post on just hey, treat your treat your data assets like a product and treat that team also like a product team, which is it's a pretty kind of fresh take. The big book of dashboards is a nice big color 400-page kind of giant book, literally on dashboards. And so this is my favorite book on dashboards if you want to get more familiar with dashboard design. Of course, Edward Tufte's books are also a great kind of primer on some of the visualization principles. There's also a recent post I did want to mention on Stack Overflow by the observable team called Stop Aggregating Away the Signal in Your Data, which kind of highlights the importance of having multiple views into the same data side by side to identify some outliers and certain types of signal that you can't get when you purely aggregate aggregate the signal away in your data. So hope this was useful, kind of just a general overview. I'd love to take some questions now.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. And these resources are super great. I actually remember in our community Slack, someone had mentioned the stop aggregating away your signal, like the signal in your data. And it's a great article. I also love how you described dashboarding, like with the curated experience. I've not heard that way of describing dashboards before. And yeah, that really, I don't know, that like sunk in for me. So thank you. That was awesome.
Awesome.
Oh, here we go. We just got a community question. What is the capability for extended programmable charts with Superset?
Programmable charts, I'm curious what they mean by that. I think my video is lagging. I think this happened last time too. I'm curious what they mean by that, but in terms of extending, you can build your own chart plugins. So that's kind of one way people get around any existing charts limitations potentially. And at the end of the day, all the charts are they're just generating SQL on users' behalf. So there's a no-code interface where you can come in and put different types of filters or kind of where clauses and things like that, and that also makes them a little bit more dynamic. I don't know. I hope that answers your question, but if you have a follow-up, I'd be happy to answer that too.
Yeah, and I would love to ask one more question because I think we do have time. We have a little bit of time, but I would love to know kind of like what you feel makes Timescale and Superset like a compelling pairing for dashboarding and data intensive dashboarding.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing is there's a few things. So I think one is definitely just the performance. So like Superset's origins are very much in time series visualization. Like over 70% of the charts I think are some type of time series chart in Superset. So the roots are very much in this kind of slice and dice time series focus. And so that pairs really well with Timescale because I mean the performance that I've seen from Timescale has been very impressive. And again, not a Timescale expert, but just with the little that I've learned and I've played with the fact that I can kind of guarantee that I'm not going to be querying raw data. That's kind of the name of the game for having fast dashboards is to always hitting something that's a little bit more optimized. And I think that's really important. And the fact that it's really easy to do so, I think is really big. And the second one is that time is just like everywhere in Superset. So even if you're doing a discrete chart, the tool will still ask you, do you want to filter the data on a specific time range? And so almost most of the queries that are Superset's generating on the user's behalf, there is kind of this implicit orientation around time. And so if all of those queries are going to benefit from the kind of aggregates and other optimizations that Timescale is doing, then that's just going to make most of the charts and dashboards that people use in Superset just load all that much more quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and giving this talk. This was super cool. It looks like we do have another question. But I think we might have time to actually answer it too.
Nice.
More questions. Yeah. So I like the analytical, operational, strategic breakdown that you did. Are different technologies commonly adapted for each? It seems like they map roughly with OLAP, real-time, predictive.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it honestly depends. I think if you're a very large company, you may have very different teams and products driving each of these. I think in a lot of organizations, though, as long as you have data in a database and you have some type of BI tool or visualization tool, you can definitely do all three of these in kind of most BI tools, and it'll work great with most databases. So I don't necessarily think, unless it's specifically a competitive advantage for your organization, I don't really think it's really necessary. And one thing I will clarify is I don't, even though strategic is framed as progress towards the future, I don't really see it as predictive as much, because I think that's kind of a different thing entirely. And I think, yeah, in general, dashboards kind of very much live outside of the domain of predictive modeling for the most part. It's kind of what I mean by progress towards the future is more just like showing the current progress, but kind of towards the future, towards a future orientation. And so it's going to focus a little bit less on just showing maybe a distribution. It's going to just very much focus on alignment towards a shared goal. So that's kind of what I mean about the future. But I think from a tooling standpoint, I think in most cases, these don't need to be separate tools unless there's a very specific kind of reason to do so. So if, you know, in the operational case, you may want, let's say you're looking at observability data, like you probably don't want to do that in a BI tool, right? To be honest, you probably actually want to do it in a very purpose-built tool just for that. And so that's maybe a case where people may not want a generalized kind of a data and dashboarding tool. They may actually want something that's highly contextualized to their domain or their use case. And I know Timescale has an observability thing here. So I think there are some cases there where it could make sense. But honestly, for a lot of organizations, they may not even need to be separate tools.
Awesome. Yeah, these are great questions. Thank you all for asking them. Yeah, I think we hit our time, but thank you so much, Srini, for coming on and giving this awesome talk. I know that I have some great tips now for dashboards. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nice.
And Brian said, great answer. Thank you. So
Awesome.